Have you ever woken up to an unfamiliar silence? A hollow feeling deep within you, as if a part of your soul has quietly slipped away in the night? You trace the years in your mind. Years spent giving, sacrificing, carrying the weight of others' needs. And now, as the seasons of life change, a single, piercing question whispers in the stillness. What is left for me? For so long, we have flowed with the river of duty, love, and expectation, believing that if we give enough, we will one day be seen, be remembered, and finally be cared for in return. But what if, in the end, all that giving has led you to a place where the world no longer seems to notice? When the love you poured out is met with only echoes, when the sacrifices you made no longer seem to matter, what do you have left to hold on to? I'll tell you something that I've learned with the passing of time. Something the Buddha has quietly revealed to all of us, if we are only willing to listen. This might be the key to what you've been searching for: the illusion of reciprocity. For much of our lives, we invest ourselves deeply in others. Whether it's our family, our career, or our relationships, believing that the love, kindness, and sacrifices we offer will eventually be returned. It's a natural expectation, one that gives us comfort and a sense of purpose. We pour our hearts into the people we care about, giving without hesitation, believing that, in the end, our efforts will be reciprocated in equal measure. But as time goes on, we learn the harsh truth. Life does not always return what it takes from us. We come to realize that attachment to the idea of reciprocity can only lead to suffering. In our minds, we create a quiet contract, a promise that we expect others to fulfill, often without ever verbalizing it. This belief in balance, the idea that what we give will eventually return, is not only unrealistic but also a source of profound disappointment. The Buddha taught us the principle of impermanence, anicca. Everything changes. People, relationships, and even love itself. The love you gave, the care you offered, may not always flow back in the way you expected. Time, circumstances, and the actions of others shape the course of life. And those we've given so much to may not always have the capacity, or even the desire, to give back. Let's imagine an elderly man who spent the majority of his life providing for his family. His days were filled with hard work, late nights, early mornings, all devoted to ensuring that his children had the opportunities he never had. He sacrificed his own desires, and in his heart, he expected that, one day, his children would return the favor. But as the years passed, the phone calls grew infrequent, the visits became rare, and his once bustling home fell silent. The man sat by the window, watching the world go on without him, and a quiet realization settled in. The love he had given, though abundant, did not return in the way he had hoped. This is the nature of impermanence. Love, like all things, changes. The relationships we once thought were unbreakable shift, and our expectations of reciprocity may not align with reality. Holding on to the illusion of reciprocity, believing that love will always return in kind, only leads to frustration and sadness. But this is where the wisdom of Buddhism comes in. Even though love does not always return in the way we expect, it is still enough. Love, in its purest form, is not given to receive. It is given because that is who we are. When we learn to release our expectations, we can find peace in the act of loving itself. Reclaiming your energy. As we age, one of the greatest realizations is that we must reclaim the energy we once gave so freely. For years, we may have given without thinking, selflessly putting others' needs above our own. But as time moves on, we come to understand that our energy is a finite resource, and if we continue to give without replenishing ourselves, we will eventually burn out. Self-care is often misunderstood as selfishness. But in reality, it is an essential practice of wisdom. We are not meant to give until we have nothing left to give. We must learn to care for ourselves just as we have cared for others. This is the time to turn inward, to nurture our spirit, to find peace in solitude, and to reconnect with our inner world. Take the story of Mr. Huang, a retired schoolteacher who dedicated his life to teaching. For decades, he poured his energy into shaping the minds of young students. He gave tirelessly, expecting that his family and colleagues would surround him with care and appreciation when he retired. But when the time came, he found himself alone. His children were busy with their own families, and his former colleagues had moved on. His energy, once devoted to others, seemed to have evaporated, leaving him with a sense of emptiness. One day, a friend suggested that he pick up the violin, a passion he had set aside many years ago. At first, Mr. Huang hesitated, thinking it was too late to start something new. But then he decided to try. Slowly, the music began to flow from his fingers. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful in its own way. In that music, Mr. Huang found something he hadn't realized he was missing: himself. This is what Buddhism teaches: samadhi, or deep concentration and inner peace. It's not about looking outward for validation or approval. It's about rediscovering the joy within ourselves. When we reclaim our energy and focus on our own well-being, we reconnect with the peace that exists within us. The act of self-care isn't a retreat from the world, but a return to ourselves. By nurturing our own spirits, we become more able to contribute to the world around us, not out of depletion, but from a place of strength and fulfillment. As we grow older, it becomes clearer that life is not about seeking approval from others, or chasing after the validation we once sought. It is about reclaiming our energy, focusing on our own joy, and embracing the stillness that comes from turning inward. By doing so, we find a peace that can never be taken away, no matter how much the world changes. The power of silence. As the years unfold, there's a quiet wisdom that settles into our hearts. We begin to understand that silence is not simply the absence of sound, but a powerful force, a choice that carries more weight than any words could ever hold. In our younger years, we are often eager to speak. We rush to explain, to defend, to make ourselves understood. Words flow from us like an unending stream, as if each conversation is a battle we must win. We want to be heard, to assert our place in the world, to prove that we matter. But with age comes a different kind of clarity, a realization that not every moment demands an answer. Not every question requires a response. As we age, we learn that silence is not a void, it is a space in which wisdom can bloom. It is not a retreat from life, but a deeper engagement with it. Silence is the space in which we find ourselves, not by speaking, but by listening to others, to the world around us, and to our own hearts. When we are young, silence can feel like a gap, an uncomfortable emptiness. But as we grow older, we begin to realize that in silence, there is peace. In silence, there is strength. In silence, there is power. There's a Zen story that perfectly encapsulates this profound shift in understanding. An elderly monk, a scholar who had spent his life immersed in philosophical debates, was once approached by a young, arrogant student. The student, eager to prove his own intellect, challenged the monk, his words sharp and demanding. The monk, however, did not respond immediately. He listened, nodding occasionally, his eyes calm, his expression peaceful. When the student finally finished, expecting a rebuttal, The monk simply smiled and said, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts." And then, without another word, the monk turned and walked away. The young man stood there, stunned. He had expected a counter-argument, a challenge to his ideas, a battle of wits. But instead, he was met with silence. And in that silence, something shifted within him. The monk had not needed to defend himself, not needed to argue or assert his own beliefs. The monk understood something the young man had yet to grasp. Not every battle needs to be fought. Not every word needs to be spoken. Some conversations are better left unsaid. As we age, we come to realize that not every moment needs to be filled with words. There is a quiet strength in silence. A strength that comes from the wisdom of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. Silence allows us to listen, to truly hear what others are saying. Not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Silence is the space in which we reflect on what has been said. And in that reflection, we find understanding, empathy, and peace. Silence, in its purest form, is not weakness. It is a form of mastery. It is the ability to control our impulses, to hold back when every instinct urges us to speak. It is the ability to listen without judgment, to observe without needing to intervene. It is in silence that we often discover our truest thoughts, our deepest desires, and our most profound wisdom. And as we grow older, we find that silence becomes a tool for peace, for introspection, and for connection with the world around us. Observing instead of interfering. There is a deep, almost instinctual urge within us to correct, to guide, and to protect others from the mistakes we have made. When we see someone struggling, we feel compelled to step in, to offer our wisdom, our experience, and our advice. We want to shield those we love from the pain we once endured. We believe that by intervening, we can spare them from suffering, from making the same mistakes we did. But Buddha's teachings remind us that pain is not our enemy. It is our teacher. Suffering is not a punishment, but a process of growth, transformation, and learning. The caterpillar must struggle in its cocoon, fighting against the walls that confine it. But it is in that struggle, in that effort, that the butterfly's wings grow strong. If someone were to intervene and tear open the cocoon too soon, the butterfly would never be able to fly. It is the struggle itself that prepares the butterfly for freedom. Similarly, the struggles of life, our mistakes, our failures, our heartaches, are what shape us. They give us strength, resilience, and wisdom. And sometimes, the most loving thing we can do for others is to step back and allow them to face their own struggles. This is what detachment truly means. It is not about abandoning those we love, but about trusting that their path is theirs to walk, just as ours is ours. Detachment is not indifference. It does not mean we stop caring, or that we turn away from those in need. It means we release control. We stop trying to manage, to fix, or to change others. We stop trying to force people to walk the path we think is best for them. Instead, we accept that their journey is their own, and we trust that the lessons they need to learn will come to them in their own time. I recall the story of Anand, a man whose father's gambling addiction had drained their family's wealth. For years, Anand tried everything to help his father. He pleaded with him, reasoned with him, even sought out the help of relatives. But his father was unmoved, stubborn in his ways. It broke Anand's heart to see his father destroy everything they had worked for. Yet no matter what he did, his father would not listen. Eventually, Anand reached a breaking point. He realized that he could not change his father, no matter how much he loved him. No matter how much he tried to intervene, he could not save his father from his own choices. It was then that Anand made a difficult decision. He let go. He stopped trying to control his father's actions and instead turned his focus inward. He started to build his own future, to live his own life. And when his father hit rock bottom, when he had nowhere else to turn, he came to Anand not for money, but for understanding. This is the essence of detachment. It's about knowing when to let go, when to step back, and when to trust that others must walk their own path. Detachment is not abandonment. It is freedom. It is the freedom to love without possession, to care without trying to control. It is the freedom to offer guidance without forcing change. Detachment is not about indifference. It is about allowing others the space to grow, to learn, and to evolve on their own terms. As we age, we begin to understand that not every problem requires our intervention. Not every mistake needs to be corrected, and not every person needs to be saved. We learn that love is not about control, but about acceptance. It is about holding space for others to find their own way, while still offering our support when needed. But we also understand that the most loving thing we can do for someone is to let them face their own challenges, to struggle and grow in their own time. In doing so, we give them the greatest gift of all, the chance to become who they are meant to be. The power of silence. The art of detachment. It is not about withdrawal or indifference. It is about knowing when to step in and when to step back, when to speak and when to listen. It is about finding the balance between love and freedom, between guidance and acceptance. And in that balance, we find peace, letting go of the need for approval. One of the most insidious and enduring sources of suffering in life is the relentless quest for approval. From an early age, we are taught to seek validation from others, to measure our worth by the standards set by our parents, our peers, and society at large. We are constantly striving to be seen, to be recognized, to be acknowledged. Whether it's a kind word from a friend, a nod of approval from a superior, or the quiet admiration of those around us, the need for external validation becomes a constant force that drives us. We mold ourselves to fit into the expectations of others, believing that our happiness and sense of self-worth are tied to how others perceive us. But as we grow older, as we begin to see the subtle passage of time, we come to a painful yet liberating realization. Approval is an illusion. It is fleeting, ephemeral, like a shadow that shifts and changes with the light. No matter how much we seek it, no matter how much we bend and twist ourselves into the shapes others desire, approval is always out of reach. It depends on the whims of others, on their moods, their judgments, their perceptions. One moment, you are loved and admired. The next, you are forgotten or cast aside. And in that fleeting dance, we lose ourselves. The Buddha's teachings guide us toward understanding this truth. True peace comes from within, not from the opinions of others. When we attach our sense of worth to external validation, we are forever tethered to the ever-changing winds of other people's expectations. We are constantly chasing something that is inherently unstable and unreliable. Approval, in this sense, becomes a fleeting drug, always just out of reach. And when we do grasp it, it never lasts. Consider the story of Lila, an elderly woman who spent the majority of her life seeking the approval of others. From the moment she could remember, she lived for the praise of those around her. As a child, she sought her parents' approval, constantly striving to meet their expectations. As an adult, she lived to please her husband, and later, her children. She gave herself so fully to the needs and desires of others, that she forgot to ask, "What do I truly want?" She sacrificed her own dreams and desires to live up to the expectations of those she loved. Yet, as the years passed, she found herself in her 60s, sitting alone in a quiet house. Her children had grown up and moved away. Her husband, now absent, had his own life. Lila realized, with a shock that resonated deeply in her heart, that in all those years of seeking approval, she had never truly lived for herself. She had spent her life trying to fulfill others' desires, to meet their expectations, but had forgotten to check in with her own. It was only when Lila was free from the need for others' approval that she began to feel the first stirrings of peace. She had nothing left to prove to anyone. No more expectations. No more promises to keep to others. For the first time in her life, she could breathe freely. Not because she had finally earned the approval she had spent years seeking, but because she had let go of the need for it altogether. The constant weight of external validation, which had once defined her existence, was gone. And in that space, something profound happened. Lila discovered herself. She realized that she had been living for others, but not for her own soul. She had been so focused on fitting into the mold others had set for her, that she had never taken the time to shape her own life. In that moment of realization, Lila found a kind of freedom she had never known before. It was a freedom that came not from the approval of others, but from a deep acceptance of herself. She no longer sought the approval of her children, her friends, or anyone else. She understood, with a clarity that only time could bring, that true happiness and peace could only come from within. This is the great lesson. True happiness comes from within. You do not need external validation to feel whole. You do not need anyone else's approval to know that you are worthy, that you are enough. The moment we let go of the need to be seen, to be recognized, to be validated by others, we are free. We are free to live on our own terms, to make choices based on what brings us joy, not on what others expect of us. Letting go of the need for approval is not an easy task. For many of us, it feels like a slow unraveling of the ties that have bound us to others' expectations. It can feel like we are standing naked in the world, vulnerable and exposed, without the safety of validation. But in that vulnerability, we find true power. We find the strength to live authentically, to follow our own path, and to honor our own desires. In the absence of the need for approval, we discover our true selves. We no longer need to live for others. We can live for ourselves. We can make decisions based on what feels right for us, not on what others think is best. This freedom is a gift, one that grows richer with time. As we learn to trust ourselves and our own judgment, the quest for approval, though it may have once seemed essential, ultimately keeps us trapped in a cycle of dependency and insecurity. But when we let go of this need, we open ourselves to the beauty of being fully alive, fully present, and fully ourselves. We begin to understand that we do not need to prove anything to anyone. We are enough, just as we are. This is the true freedom we seek, the freedom to live authentically, to live for ourselves, and to find joy in simply being. The moment we let go of the need for approval, we find that we no longer need to seek external validation to feel whole. We are whole. We always have been. And in that realization, we discover peace, the peace that comes from within. The peace that is not dependent on anyone else's approval, but is rooted in the quiet knowing that we are enough, just as we are. As we reach the later years of our lives, we often begin to realize that the greatest act of love we can offer ourselves is the simple, yet powerful, act of choosing ourselves. We've spent so much of our lives giving, sacrificing, and pouring our energy into others. But there comes a time when we must recognize that our own well-being is not a luxury, it is a necessity. Just as a tree needs water, sunlight, and space to grow, so too do we need care, rest, and nurture for our body, mind, and spirit. The world may have taught us that prioritizing ourselves is selfish, but the truth is far from that. You cannot pour from an empty cup. If we neglect our own well-being, we have nothing left to give. And as we age, the time comes to stop seeking permission, to stop waiting for validation. You owe no one an explanation for choosing peace. You do not need to justify why you must focus on your own happiness. In fact, true happiness is not something given, it is something we claim for ourselves. Something we create through the choices we make. Let go of the resentment that holds you back. Release the weight of expectations placed on you by others. Embrace the simple, profound contentment of just being. Being present. Being whole. Being at peace with yourself. In doing so, you will find that life, no matter how late in the game, still has so much to offer you. You have spent years, maybe even decades, shaping the lives of others. Now, the pen is in your hands. This chapter is yours to write. You have the power to turn the page and begin again. To nurture your own well-being with grace, purpose, and unwavering self-respect. The world will continue to move forward. But now, it's your time. Your happiness is yours to create. And in that creation, you will find the peace that has been waiting for you all along. If this message resonates with you, if you feel a stirring within, I invite you to join me on this journey. Subscribe to Whisper of Age and let's continue to discover the wisdom, peace, and strength that comes with truly embracing ourselves at this stage of life. Together, we will walk the path of self-discovery. And with each step, we will uncover the beauty of our own inner peace. Remember, the greatest gift you can give yourself at this moment in time is to choose yourself. And when you do, you will find that you have everything you need to live the rest of your days with purpose, joy, and peace. You are the author of your story. Make it one of peace. Make it one of self-love. And let that be the legacy you leave behind.